Hey, it's Lauren. Thank you so much for listening to The Afterlight. Enjoy the episode. This episode has been brought to you by my free masterclass. Reduce your work hours by half without playing catch up on the weekend. So basically, I am giving you an opportunity to grab your ticket for a free masterclass. So in 50 minutes, that's 50, you'll be able to stop overextending yourself without being racked with guilt. You will be able to create some space to stay on task. You will start saying no to requests, and I actually teach you how to do this. And you will unlock the secret to reducing your work hours by half without playing catch up on the weekend. It's a free masterclass. It costs you absolutely nothing. All the details are on my website at rawconsulting.com. That's RAHRAH consulting.com. Or in the show notes, there's a direct link. Just click on free masterclass and grab your ticket. I can't wait to see you there. All right, Lauren Grace here, and welcome to the show. I'm joined today by Katie Beecher. She's a licensed professional counselor and medical and emotional intuitive with over 30 years of experience. She's been featured in Goop, Kourtney Kardashian's website, Poosh, and Miranda Kerr's Cora Organics blog. Yes, girl. Katie has a unique way of working with clients. She creates a detailed, individualized physical, emotional, and spiritual report and symbolic painting before ever seeing them, talking with them, or seeing a photograph. Katie will be launching her new book, Heal From Within, An Intuitive Guide to Wellness, in early 2021. And she's joining me today to talk about her gift as an emotional and medical intuitive and healing from within. Katie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we have a lot to get into on the show today. So much to jam pack into an hour, but I'm pretty sure you and I can at least get a good start on it. So
Definitely.
before we get into kind of the nitty gritty about what an emotional and medical intuitive is and a bit about your journey, I would love to hear a bit about how your spiritual journey began and when did you realize that you were intuitive?
Yeah, great question. So I think I always knew, even as a really, really little kid, that I knew things about people and knew things about adults. I could kind of read my parents' feelings. Um, I remember just feeling like a really old little kid. I remember being like 3 and looking up at my parents after they had some dumb fight about eggs and saying, these people are not equipped to raise me. Like, I have to do it myself. So I don't have a lot of childhood memories, but I remember that.
Wow.
Yeah. And I would just, tell them things about our family members or friends or whatever. And they'd look at me like I had 3 heads, like, how do you know that? And so I always I always was super sensitive, still am, which doesn't always make life easy. But
No.
around the age of 10, when The Exorcist came out, I was terrified by that, by the way. I never saw the movie, but just at that time, the music was on radio, and we had radios then. And, the ads on TV, and it was really terrifying. And I started to pick up, or being conscious of picking up evil, which I always was able to do. I just wasn't as conscious of it. So
Right.
that made me not want anything to do with any intuitive abilities or picking up spirit or anything like that. And then when I was 16, I developed 12, developed an eating disorder and depression. And at
Mm.
16, I decided either I was going to get better or I was going to end my life, because it just was not a great way to live.
Yeah.
And before telling, or I ended up telling my parents eventually, but I just called their family doctor and let him know what I was doing. And he recommended a therapist, which I had a car and a job, so I went to and paid for myself.
Wow.
Yeah, it's divine intervention, because who does that at 16 years old? And it wasn't anything special about me. It was just I was meant to get better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and do this work. And so I learned all about how to connect to intuition and self-love and self-acceptance. And it was a Jungian therapist, Carl Jung, and he's very accepting of intuition, of psychic abilities, of astrology, of everything. So she taught me to nurture all that, and that how to be safe with it, how not to be afraid of it. And I knew at that point that I was supposed to write the book I wrote, and use the gifts and the gift of being able to get better to help people. So
Wow.
yeah, so that was kind of, and even when I just worked as a therapist, I always worked really intuitively and always listened to guides and
Mm.
intuition and things. So
It sounds to me like from a very young age, you had this, well, obviously you were very resilient, but you also had inner knowingness.
yes,
What do you
yeah.
think? Do you think you were just born that way and you just somehow that gift just continued to grow? Or do you think that, at 16, you were also given the tools and the skills to kind of connect with that?
I think we're all born with it. I think we all have it. I don't think there's anything special about me. And just because I make my living this way, because this is what I do, doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't have intuitive abilities or psychic abilities.
Yeah.
I'd really like to think it's more common and less woo-woo than it is.
Yeah.
And all the kids that I work with and stuff, it's just natural to them. And then it gets, just like self-esteem gets sort of pounded out of us, I think that gets pounded out of us too, by people who don't understand it themselves or are afraid of it. So
Yeah.
I think the other thing was being empathic, which is picking up other people's feelings, and having these skills was a survival skill in my home, because there was a lot of mental illness. There was a lot of, my father was very loud and scary and had a lot of issues and addictions and things. And
Mhm.
in order to try to not feel abandoned or let down or hurt in some way, I really had to anticipate what these people were going to do before they did it. And that happens all the time in dysfunctional homes, where you basically, if you don't protect yourself, you're going to get hurt more than you already are.
Right.
So
Well, I do want to talk to you in a minute a little bit more about being an empath, because I'm an empath too, and I find it very challenging sometimes.
sure, sure.
Yeah, but one thing that I did want to just kind of, I guess, point out is when you were talking about how you believe that we're all born with it. I agree with you. It's so funny because we very often know the right decision that's going to support us, and yet we're somehow conditioned. I don't know if it's conditioning or it's just habit to just seek somebody else's counsel or to ask everybody else's opinion on what they think we should or shouldn't do. And it's funny, like sometimes I notice even for myself, if I'm spending time with somebody and I'm in the crux of making a choice and I haven't gone within and listened to my inner knowingness, I might actually pitch to them like,
Sure,
here's what's going on, what do you think, right?
sure.
uh, but then that's when confusion happens. So do you think that we're just kind of not really in, I don't know, and then I guess it opens up the whole discussion about sometimes we're just and I'm kind of using just like a blanket statement here.
Yeah,
A lot of people actually like to avoid being alone and being with themselves.
yes. I believe that, first of all, we're not taught from young children to be intuitive and to trust ourselves, because a lot of people have control issues based on fear. And if you have a young child like I was, who knew all these things, who knew all these truths, and we're exposing them and basically calling bullshit, then, my parents didn't want to hear it, because
Right.
that was blowing their little illusion there. And when you call parents out on things, or anybody out on things, and they don't want to deal with their issues, they're going to blame you and they're going to deny it. So I think we really need to start teaching our kids about intuition and trusting themselves at
Hmm.
a much younger age, if you do it at all, but you need to do it. Um, and what was the second part of your question? Because it was really, really good.
Oh, I don't even know. I guess I was just talking
Oh,
about how, seeking outside counsel all
yes.
the
Okay.
time. Yeah.
So I also think that people are afraid to make decisions because
Yeah.
they're afraid to be wrong,
Responsibility.
right? Right? Yeah, because you own it if you make that decision, but if you can blame it on somebody else, it's not your fault. And also that if I work with people a lot on connecting to their intuition. And sometimes, like you said, they know what to do, but they're really afraid to listen because listening means changing. It means speaking up for themselves. It
Yeah.
can mean getting out of a bad relationship. It can mean pissing somebody off. It means changing your life. So there's a lot invested in not trusting your intuition.
Mhm.
Um, if you're around, a lot of dysfunctional people who aren't nurturing you and things like that.
Yeah, but one thing that we did learn from your story, and it's not uncommon because you do hear this, that a lot of people have these revelations or whatever, is that when you do make those choices, then everything falls into place for you and you're supported along your journey, which is critical. Another thing that came to me when you were speaking as well was just that, we very often in society, for whatever reason, we almost believe that your age determines your wisdom level or your ranking.
For sure, for sure.
So it's like, girl, Katie, little Katie, you're only 3. What do you know? I've been on this earth 30 years. I know way more than you.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 daughters. They're 29 and 23, and they've always been wise beyond their years. And my husband and I have always said they're way smarter than we could ever be. So so we just learn from them all the time. And I think you need to do that because even from I don't even know if I believe in reincarnation, but things have happened that have made me do that. Maybe they've been here a million more lifetimes than we have and they know way more. So
Yeah.
it's a big, assumption to think they really don't know anything. And kids are really good observers too.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't have the filter of needing to, put on a brave face or
Yeah.
to, like be diplomatic or,
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, you know, um, yeah, it's definitely a thing. I think adults need to give kids a lot more credit.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, let's get into the discussion about being an empath, because I would assume that, with the line of work that you're in, a lot of it's based on intuition, connecting to yourself, that being an empath is actually one of the probably big skills that you do possess that can help you in your line of work. So I guess I'm still sort of trying to figure out, and I think you can help me actually with this, Katie, because you've turned it into a career. So sometimes I find it not helpful to be empathic at all. And I find it difficult to discern what's my stuff versus
Mm,
what somebody else's. And also how to shield and protect, I guess, effectively, although I have been working on that and improving in every day in that
sure.
way. So yeah, I was just wondering if you could just kind of talk on that. You did mention that when you were growing up, your father had a very strong energy. I would imagine that, for people who are intuitive and empathic, that when we get around a strong energy, at least for me, it's very challenging to be within my power and within myself within that. So yeah, I'd
For
just
sure.
love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I mean, this comes up in almost every session, so you are not alone. Um, and being basically there's being empathic, which is being able to put yourself in somebody else's place, and then there's being an empath, which is actually being able to feel other people's feelings. And it can definitely be challenging. I think some of where it, it gets a little sticky and more difficult is if people think that that means that they've given up their energy to someone else or that
Mm.
somebody else has control over their energy. And that is not the case. So there are people who may disagree with me. This is just, what I
Your
know in my
truth. Yeah.
experience. But I don't believe that anybody else has control over you or your energy unless you've left yourself vulnerable by being in a addiction state,
Mhm.
or if you are really mentally ill and you've lost that soul connection. But
Right.
in any other circumstance, you are the one in control. So I'm not a big believer in the term like energy vampire, and I know what people are getting at, but that implies sort of a predator that you can't control. And
Right.
and I don't think that's the case. So step one is accepting and understanding your own power, and deciding that this is my energy, this is my body, these are my opinions, and I don't have to give them up to anyone. Somebody can be in a bad mood around me, and I may pick that up, but then I can decide I'm not taking that on. Um, I'm going to leave the room. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to remove myself from that situation. So, understanding that you have power.
One of the
And
affirmations that I brought into my life, I don't know, years and years ago, because I'm a strong personality. And so sometimes I feel, yeah, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like I give a lot of power,
sure.
energy because I just am like that. But I just remind myself that I know how to be powerful in a way that benefits all people, like other
Mm,
people. And it's safe for me to be powerful in the way that I know how. So I just, if anyone
nice.
was connecting, there's an affirmation for you.
Right? No, definitely, definitely. Um, Also, like you said about what are your feelings and what are other people's. Now, as much as I know about this subject and as much as I've learned fiercely how to guard myself and guard my energy and put up boundaries, there's still times I catch myself and go, where is that anxiety from? Or something. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and I have to say, and I always have people ask, number one, what are you feeling? Identify your feeling and allow it. Because a lot of
Right.
people just push them down. I don't want to deal with it. So allow it. And then ask yourself, like, what am I anxious about? What am I sad about? And if you cannot label something, then it's probably not about you. You're probably picking it up from elsewhere. But if you can label something in your own life and say, oh, okay, I am preparing for a test, or I am going to go on a job interview or whatever, and you can identify it and take ownership and say, this is mine, these are my feelings now,
Right.
what can I do about it? you know um, so sometimes there's situations we can't necessarily change, but we can still help ourselves. Like, we can go for a run, we can go exercise, we can meditate, we can write, we can do things for stress relief.
Yeah.
So I'm really big on empowering yourself, and I think that's super important. And then also tied into that is being connected to intuition and listening to that inner voice, because that will always guide you in a loving way. And if you're listening to that and connected with that, you have a shield, and you don't need to get so much from others, if that makes sense.
Yes, because you're filling up your own cup, basically.
Mhm. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. um
Yeah.
so I think, um being an empath is very real. But you're not giving up your power, um you
Yeah.
know and you're not losing control, and you also don't need other people to uh detox you, if you will, I guess.
Mm,
I can teach people ways of grounding, and I have the ability to do energy healing, but somebody doesn't need me to put protection around them. They can do that themselves.
yeah.
um, I just think we give our power over to other people
Yeah.
frequently.
Yeah, I think sometimes too we don't know better. I can honestly say that wasn't until about 6 months ago that I actually interviewed a guest, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes for our listener at home, because I did a whole episode just on shielding. But she taught me a bit about shielding, and
Mhm.
I developed like 3 levels of shield for myself. And that's really helped me because I also like the news bothered me. I would
Right.
never go into, like, she talked about going to a psychic fair in our conversation. I would
Okay.
never have entertained anything of the like to do that. And
Mhm.
now I'm understanding a bit more about shielding. So, and I also realized too that being an empath, it's like the more that I'm aware of it, the more that I can see that I'm feeling other people's stuff that doesn't belong to me. So I love how you're saying, where's this coming from? That's a really easy way to identify, whether or not this stuff belongs to you. How do you shield yourself to kind of keep your own
Yeah.
energy
So, I
from
mean,
this?
at this point, after being a therapist and growing up and like, I say I was raised by wolves, uh,
Exactly.
it's kind of second nature. And I've learned to turn my abilities on and off, because if I kept open all the time, that would be frightening. It's partly why I do my readings the way I do, and doing a lot of prep before and then working with people. But I've kind of learned that, first of all, the first step was connecting with my intuition and realizing that I wasn't alone anymore. So I had that partner in life, if you will,
Mm.
that helped give me the strength to say, I can have my own opinions. I don't need to be you. I don't need to be influenced by you. So that
Yeah.
was a big deal.
Yeah.
And then just like sometimes if it's really intense, um, there's a little exercise I can teach your listeners at home,
Yeah.
and it's to somebody else taught me this. I can't take credit for it, but to put your feet on the ground, whether you're sitting or standing, and imagine your hara line, which is your line of power that goes up from Mother Earth through your spine and up to the heavens. Take a deep breath in and imagine you taking in the power and protection of Mother Earth. As you breathe out, say to yourself, um, I am letting go of any entities, feelings, and thoughts and people that no longer belong to me and no longer serve me. And any version of that you want, to do that exact. But then you just keep breathing in and out for as long as you want to. And sometimes you just need a few breaths. Other times you might, need a few minutes of it. But you can go into a bathroom if you're at a gathering. You can do it in your mind as you're breathing. You can say it in your mind. You can do it anywhere. So it's a really powerful, easy exercise to help you ground and be mindful and set up the shield. And as you do it, you can also, shield yourself with white light and all that kind of good stuff as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I think that sometimes we do feel like we need to overcomplicate it. And one thing that I know from speaking with people like yourself is that as long as your intention is clear on what you're trying to do and what you want to
Correct.
achieve from that, there's no wrong way of doing anything. So like
Correct.
you said there, and by the way, for our listener at home, I will put that little exercise in a separate episode as well, so you can go back and listen to it individually instead of having to fast forward to this section of our conversation. But Katie, you really just kind of encourage people to understand the process of that, but then to use their own language within that.
The other thing that I really want to emphasize is I work with a lot of people who don't feel safe emotionally or spiritually or physically. And I fully believe that if we come from a place of love, if we're connected with love, then we are always safe and protected. Love is so much more powerful than any negativity or evil. And I know that from my own family. I've overcome a lot of people who are pretty bad people who really wanted to hurt me and my family. And it was just keeping that love and realizing that, I'm always protected, and we all are. We all have an army of angels and an army of guides and people looking out for us.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. And I think that, exactly what you said, there are all these people, well, all these beings and entities that can support us and lend a hand if we just ask them to, because we have free will. Therefore, we need to put that intention and ask for that guidance. So do you connect with your guides and your angels? Like, is that something that you kind of put that intention out to help you, with your gifts?
Constantly. Yeah, that's how I live. Um, it's how I do my readings. It's how I live my life. It's how I've lived since I learned how to do it. And I kind of use the term intuition and guides interchangeably, because it doesn't necessarily really
So do
matter.
I. Yeah, it sounds very
Yeah,
funny if you say to someone, "So my guides are telling me," especially
right.
if they're not open to it. I was talking to my family yesterday, and I give the credit to myself, even though I know spirit is telling
Right,
me
right,
these things.
right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, there's, exercises that I teach other people that I learned that saved my life that I do to this day, so and it's just, it's not hard stuff. You don't need to be a medical intuitive to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Can you give an example of one of those?
yeah, yeah, definitely. So this is from Jungian psychology, did not invent it. And the a few premises of it: you can use this to talk to your intuition, you can use it to talk to your body, you can use it to talk to symptoms, um, you can use it to talk to people who've passed. So multiple uses for this. And as far as the intuition, Carl Jung's view of it was that it's this all-knowing force that loves you and accepts you completely and unconditionally, knows everything about you, knows what's best for you. You don't have to do anything right or wrong. You're just there, and it's always with you. And it's always there protecting you, kind of like I've been talking about. So the technique is to physically write down either a question or your feelings, um, or just, thoughts, and just sit and wait, and direct it to your intuition. I'm sorry. And then just sit and wait for what you hear, feel, see back, and write that down. And then write back to it. And then whatever you get in return, you write that down, write back to it, and you keep going for as long as you'd like. Now, sometimes I'll do it for 5 minutes, sometimes I'll do it for 20 minutes. And some examples are, sometimes I'll just say, do you have anything I need to know today? Or I will ask an actual question if I'm trying to decide something or figure out, sometimes doses of supplements or whatever. Sometimes I will just start writing like I'd write to a friend and ask for feedback. There's no right or wrong. It's when you do it in writing, it's especially powerful because you have to stop what you're doing to write. So you're not as distracted.
You need to be where you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The kinesthetic act of writing actually quiets a lot of those busy thoughts in our heads that distract us. And as you listen, you are also learning what the intuitive voice sounds like and feels like, so that when you're not able to write, you can go out into the world. And when that presence is there, you can be like, oh, that's my intuition. I know who you are. That's cool. When you're using it to talk to your body or symptoms, which I love, and I did this with my eating disorder, you talk to, like, I talked to my eating disorder as a friend. So it was, why are you here? What can I do to help heal you? What are you trying to tell me? Thank you for being here and making me have to change my life. Instead of, and always, like being a warrior and fighting things all the time, it's looking at it like, maybe there was a damn good reason this is here. And for me, having that eating disorder was one of the best gifts I've ever gotten.
Wow, that's so powerful. Who and one thing that thank you for sharing all that, Katie. That was wonderful. And I guess I just want to highlight to the listener at home as well, in case they missed it, because there was so much gold in that. That you had a real nugget of wisdom. I mean, the whole thing was, but when you were talking about paying attention to the responses that you're getting, what came to me is that when I'm listening to my intuitive voice, when I ask a question, I actually take the time to listen. For me, the voice in my head speaks differently than I do to myself.
Yes.
So yes, so it speaks like simpler words, that's for sure, with a bit of like longer spacing in between, and it doesn't overcomplicate anything. So I
Neat.
asked a question a while ago, and I also asked this question multiple times because I really wanted a certain answer. So over days and days where I found myself going into, oh, is this, a little bit of doubt, I would ask it again. And, at one point I just got yes, 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 yes. And I went, okay, I get it now. you
Got
know?
it.
Yeah, and I guess so it's like what you're saying is when you're taking the time to basically do a question and answer, have a conversation on a page, and when you're not judging the responses, that's a really big thing I'm sure you would agree with, is not sitting there and going, why am I writing this? It's just writing it out without any kind of I guess agenda and any kind of blockages, like just really allowing it to flow. Yeah, that you pay attention to the way that that message is coming through, and then like you said, you're able to discern in your day-to-day living, I guess, messages that come from maybe your ego side as opposed to coming from your spirit side.
And what you said is a really important point, because I always tell people these are the things that tend to trip people up. One of them is thinking, well, I have to have lightning bolts and see angels if I'm talking to my intuition. It has to be like this big, huge event. And a lot of time that voice just sounds like a different version of our own. Or
Yeah.
we won't get a whole lot. You just get a few words, especially when you're starting out. Or you're a lot of time people ask things like a future question, like where am I going to live? I don't really advocate for things like that, because that's more of a psychic-y type of thing.
Yeah.
It's more useful for like living your life and stuff. But people also get tripped up on asking, like, am I doing this right? Or is it just my own voice, or just what I want to hear? Or, there's so much judgment involved. And judgment is a form of fear, and that gets in the way of listening.
Yes. Whew. So many good things in this conversation. I'm absolutely loving talking to you. Okay, Katie, I need to bring up a point that you brought up earlier. You were talking about your eating disorder, and then when you were speaking, you said, "Thank you for being here." And I guess the thing that came to me is that very often I see and read things and hear people talking about, "Oh, we're going to fight that." Oh,
Yeah,
we're gonna, the fight against cancer or whatever, the fight against this disease,
right.
dis-ease. Yeah. And so I guess I was just kind of wondering your opinion, because I have always known that that was not the way to deal with something, to fight it. I've been learning a lot, especially, but I do know that my truth is that you need to accept the moment as though you had chosen it, accept things as they are, and not kind of create that sort of friction. So I was
Right.
just wondering if you could comment on the whole concept of let's fight to eliminate this thing, or yeah, just what your thoughts were on that.
I love that question. I had Lyme disease and every co-infection under the sun at one point, which growing up in Connecticut, I learned I had it since I was a kid and was diagnosed in my 40s. So my philosophy was to, number one, not identify with it. I am not Lyme disease. For me, I didn't want to use ribbons or want to wear a shirt that I had Lyme, and I'm not putting anyone down who does that. Just for me, it didn't work,
Yeah.
because I felt like I was taking ownership of it. I didn't use the word my when it came to my symptoms. I barely used the word Lyme unless I was talking to my doctor. I
Yeah.
just didn't
Yeah.
want to go there. And instead of, now, fighting can mean a lot of things. And I did everything I possibly could to get better. Anything I needed to do spiritually, nutritionally, whatever my naturopath told me to do, I did.
Yeah.
And that could be construed as a healthy way of fighting it, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think what got me better was when I wrote to it and I said, okay, why are you here?
Mhm.
What are you doing? What is the purpose for this right now? Because it's really kind of scary and inconvenient, and I'm not really into it.
Yeah.
And, you know, um, so it told me that I was putting off writing the proposal to the book that it had told me, that my intuition had told me to write when I was 16. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's a biggie. So having that spiritual connection, I really do believe helped me to heal, because I've been recovered for a long time.
Yeah.
I think that if we are always looking at something like a disease as something that's bad that we have to fight, our body kind of becomes our enemy.
Yeah,
And
because we're always in conflict.
right, right. And um and also, when I think of that, and especially with the way that cancer and even a lot of Lyme is portrayed, it's like you can't ever heal from it. You always have to wait for it to come back. And I think that sets people up for PTSD and for failure and for massive freaking anxiety. So if it's this big monster that you have to fight that has all this power over you, again, that's not empowering you. So I think it's counterproductive to healing in a lot of cases. I mean, everybody needs to do what they need to do. Like, it's not great to succumb to it and just be like, well, I don't really care. I'm just not going to do anything or work on healing at all. Or, like that's not at all what I'm talking about. But I just think that a lot of traditional medicine goes about it in a counterproductive way, with some of those terms and things. So
It's interesting because I read a lot of Eckhart Tolle. I talk about him on the show a fair amount because for me, he changed my whole life. And yeah, and a lot of that is like we identify with, oh, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, or my name's Lauren, or you know what I mean? I'm Canadian and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I guess you could almost put sometimes ailments in the same sort of way that you identify with that ailment, but that's not who you are. You're I believe you're the observer behind that.
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of like seeing that that's different.
It makes me really sad when I see people who just think that they are these damaged goods or that
Yeah.
they have all this baggage because they have whatever issues they are, and they don't. It's like it's hard to see beyond that pain, and it is really painful, and a lot of it's because they've struggled with it.
Yeah.
But I work with so many people who are like, well, when I get better, I'm going to leave my shitty marriage. Or when I lose this weight I want, I'm going to like open a business. Or when I do this, I'm going to do this, like be my true self. And I'm always like, no, it has to be the other order. You have to, if you want to heal or live your life, you need to start living. And maybe you can't run a marathon if you have an autoimmune disease, but there are things that you can do to enhance your quality of life. If you want to
Yeah.
exercise, there's chair yoga. Like there's always
Yeah.
something you can do to like be more than just the pain that you're feeling. And
Yeah.
it's also, unfortunately we tend to reward people um, in a way for being ill or having problems. And
Well, you
in
mean we give them all the attention?
right, and for some of these people, that's the only attention they've ever gotten. It's really sad. And it's like there's so many examples of like bad marriages or bad relationships, but it's like they didn't have the courage to speak up or get out. And once they got sick, they finally started getting attention from people, or they were taken a little bit more seriously, or the husband had to stay home and take care of them, or they got to quit the job they freaking hated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like it brought about positive changes, but instead of saying, okay, how can I use this as a positive to move forward,
Yeah.
get very entrenched in it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And listen to my sad story and let me tell you all about it. One thing you were talking as well too when you mentioned chair yoga, one thing that came to me was something that I learned from Oprah and Eckhart did a whole series. Yeah, you probably know about it. A New Earth. Anyway, a New Earth podcast. Check it out.
Okay.
But one of the things that one of the callers called in and said that they had a disease and they understood that they weren't their disease and they wanted to know like kind of how to work around it. And he, one of the things that he mentioned was almost what you said was talk about it with your doctor, but you don't need to talk about it with everybody else. And
Exactly.
when you're having pain in your body, let's say, focus on a part of your body that doesn't have the pain and feel into that. So is that a strategy that you recommend as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just try to find things that do bring you joy, even if it's for 5 minutes. Try to get yourself out of that pain mode, emotional, physical, or spirit. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of the things I love most about the type of individualized work that I do, because it's the whole person. It's identifying all of the possible root causes for issues and all of the possible ways to achieve wellness or to recover or
Yeah.
to feel more spiritually connected, or it's looking at everything. And a lot of people will come to me with a symptom not realizing that there's all these other things attached to it that they either hadn't considered or didn't want to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. I want to go into the conversation a little bit about affirmations. And one thing that I will say for our listener at home as well is that I have another podcast and I did an episode on mindset. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You might find that helpful. It's just another way of getting clear on the messages you're telling yourself, and then an exercise on replacing that with affirmations. So, take it or leave it. But I just thought that's a tool for our listener. But I wanted to know, Katie, about your opinion on Louise Hay's book, Heal Your Life, and whether or not that's another avenue that you kind of encourage people to look at. And if you could explain that, I'm happy to give
Yeah,
context as well if you don't want to.
yeah. I mean, for sure. What a lot of people don't realize is that people like Louise Hay and Tara Brach and all of these people that we talk about now, the Carl Jung was talking about this, decades before. So that I love that book because it's all about, okay, this is the part of the body and this is the characteristics of it emotionally and spiritually. Um, this is what it might relate to in terms of a trauma. This is why if you have reproductive issues, and it's probably not an accident. Let me start that over. If you have trauma to your second chakra, like sexual abuse or something like that,
Mhm.
it's not an accident that you develop, reproductive issues or fertility issues or
Yeah.
endometriosis. It's like there's a connection with all of this. So
Yeah.
I love that she made it so simple to
Yeah.
look up. I think it's a good place to start,
Yeah.
and everybody has their own individual things.
For sure.
Um, but no, I really, it's all Jungian, it's all symbolic, and I love it. It's how I do a lot of my work. So
Yeah, and then like you said, I mean, because I have heal your body, heal your life, sorry, and or is it heal your body? I'm drawing my blank right now. Anyway, I have Louise's book
you
as
can
well.
heal your life. You can heal your life. It's called.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And one of the things that I got when I was reading that as well, sometimes the affirmations are a bit long for me to remember the entire thing,
Mhm.
so I just put it into my own language, which is
Exactly.
something that you mentioned before, is just kind of finding what's going to work for you, because what's going to work for Katie isn't going to work for me, and what's going to work for me isn't going to work for Katie. Doesn't mean that there isn't a kind of a
Right.
compromise that's actually the perfect solution for our listener at home.
And also recognize the negative messages you give yourself and the negative things you do, and then just try to reverse them. Like if you're looking in the mirror and you're like, oh my God, my thighs are really fat, or how about just my body is beautiful, or my body's perfectly acceptable the way it is if you can't go for beautiful, like tailor what you need for you.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm really into individualization, as you can tell.
Yeah, I am too. And in that mindset exercise, I talk about that exact same thing. So that's brilliant. I'd love to know, it's so funny, Katie, because I do prepare for every interview. I always have a list of questions and all these things. And I basically haven't really asked anything that's on my list. And we only have 15 minutes left. But that being said, we're just going with the flow and I'm loving it. I'm sure I can tick a few things off here. I would love to know a little bit about how you've developed your gifts over the last 30 years or so. I know that you
Sure.
mentioned that, basically you've listened to yourself. You've almost seen the lesson within things. I know that the therapist that you worked with was really instrumental in your whole life, and then the practices of Jung as well. So yeah, do you continue to develop your gifts even now, or are you kind of ready, you just already know your stuff?
Oh, no, no, no. I mean, absolutely. A lot of it has to do with being open and with trust. Um, for the listeners, I would encourage you to check out any spiritualist churches possibly nearby. They have medium readings at church. There's a lot of inexpensive workshops that teach you how to grow your gifts and to trust them. For me, it was the more I accepted that this was there, accepted kind of the weirdness, not weirdness of it, and just allowed it to happen. And then learned how my guides talked to me, like what their language was and what it meant, the more I could trust it. And then that has naturally allowed my gifts to grow. And um, and even just I'm always really open when I do my readings to what comes through, because they're different for everybody. But
Yeah.
there I will never know even close to everything, dear God. Like I'm a medium too, and I don't get to use that as quite as much as the medical intuitive stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but when I was part of the spiritualist church, I took medium development classes. And so a lot of it is kind of being open. And it's, there's the part, like the work part I do. So I do it for other people but then there's the own spiritual part of my life that I think is really, really important to nurture and keep growing from. And like before I start every reading, I get nervous. And I've done freaking thousands of them and I shouldn't, and I always get amazing feedback, but it's always like, I really care and I want to do a good job.
Of course. Yeah.
And can I really do this? Like, this is crazy. Is this really happening? And, like.
Yeah. Cause sometimes it's magical. Like one of the things that I joke about is that if like some of the content on this podcast, it's like it belongs in a freaking sci-fi film. But
Oh,
I believe all of it. So that's it's so funny. It's so amazing. That's the thing.
nobody, people ask me all the time, like, you just know my name and age. How the hell did you write 4 pages of stuff that I literally could have wrote myself and you knew nothing? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, can you tell me about that process actually? Because that was one of my questions that I wanted to know. So basically, somebody books an appointment with you. What
Right.
information do you get from them? And then you sort of streamline, you channel the material, kind of like you were talking
Yeah.
about with your automatic writing.
So I obviously have to have their name. I have to have their email and their contact information for the Skype or FaceTime or whatever the hell we're gonna do. And then I ask for their age and I ask how they found me, and that is it. And I don't want to know anymore. And the more I know, the more I can screw up my guides, because then I start thinking. So I have a template that I've created with the chakras on one side with descriptions for people so they know what they are, emotional and spiritual and physical. And then I start with an oracle card to get me out of my own head, to get me started, put me in a direction. And then I just ask my guides to give me whatever information these people need. And I just start typing away. And then I create a symbolic painting. Again, I just ask them, where do I start? Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's an animal, sometimes it's a plant, sometimes it's who the hell knows. So just let it happen. And then I send that to them before the reading, before we meet. I should say before we meet. So I can't BS any of it. It's there, and then we go over the whole report. We go over the painting. I get their feedback. I don't want anybody substituting my intuition for theirs. If things don't fit
Right.
with them, I always say, okay, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I get information for their loved ones who have passed or for the loved ones now. So it's a complete thing. And we just, create a plan for moving forward. I work with a lot of doctors and naturopaths and other practitioners who I refer people to help enhance what I did, and to also do testing, I can't diagnose legally or ethically. So, I'll pick up symptoms, but I'll be like, hey, this person can do testing for you. This person can do this, because I want you to, know for sure what's going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
so it's really it's quite a process. It's a team effort between me and the client and whoever else they want to involve in our guides. I teach people how to connect to their intuition. Yeah, it's kind of like this. I just let it go in the direction it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
And
trust the process, which is
yeah,
always the big word that comes up when I'm speaking with people. They
yeah,
trust what they're getting, and yeah, they just know it to be true. And like you said, if there's something that you've said, like, hey, I noticed something's gray, and they're like, well, I don't know, identify that color. Oh, okay. Well, like, what about dark white? you know,
or
like,
just how could it be symbolic? Maybe it's not. Or like a really great quick example. I was doing a reading on a 12-year-old girl, and I heard teeth enamel. My humanness said, oh, she must have, a lot of cavities or whatever. So talked to her mom, and all I wrote down was tooth enamel on the report, because I know better than to interpret at this point in my life. And she said, no, she has exceptionally strong tooth enamel. So I
right.
don't always know what I'm getting or why. I just know enough to put it down. And sometimes I'll say, I'm not sure what this means, So, but I just know, put it down, we'll figure it out and go from there.
Oh, that's so cool. So, just before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about the book that you're going to be launching that's coming out this year. Is it still
It's
on
actually
track to come
next
out?
year.
Oh, next year?
Yeah, it's coming. If that's in the bio, I have to correct that. It's like January, February of 2022.
Okay, perfect. So it's an intuitive guide to wellness. So, and you talk about healing from within. So, I guess it's really in line with everything we've been discussing over the last hour. But can you tell me a little bit about, you know, that book? And do
Yeah,
you
yeah.
believe that we can heal everything from within?
I would love to. It's a combination of teaching people to connect to their intuition. And then I basically take them through a reading like they were doing it on themselves, using all of my techniques, my templates, everything I use. I educate them about all the chakras, how to interpret what's going on in their body based on chakras. There's questionnaires, there's all kinds of things to prioritize. There's all kinds of things going on. Where do I start? So it's sort of, my husband calls it Katie Beecher, the home game. But it's kind of like being your own medical intuitive. And then the solutions and tips and things like that are based on info from my guides, my experience as a counselor, and a lot of really concrete techniques from Jungian psychology too. So it's a really comprehensive book. But there's a lot written about Jungian stuff, but there's not a lot written about how to use the techniques uh, in the real world.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like, it's not a substitute for a reading. However, you can do a whole lot of healing and learn a whole lot about yourself, through that process. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. And one thing that I really love about what you've been saying over the last hour is you really seem to encourage people to find their own truth. And, I think that having a reading now and again is super fun and sometimes important to get an objective point of view from someone. But at the same time, it's so critical and key that you are able to help yourself,
Hmm.
and it sounds to me like that's a big part of how you empower people is to find that within themselves, and that your book is just a natural kind of extension of that process.
It's huge. It's everything. It's what I learned when I was recovering is, with intuition, self-love, and self-acceptance, you can heal from just about anything. And I really
Yeah.
do believe that. So if it's, how I healed was authenticity, and all the stuff that I've talked about,
Yeah.
and self-love. And I feel like that is my number one most important job when I work with people, is helping them connect to themselves and self-love.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, and if self-love is something that, is a foreign concept, um
Right?
it doesn't have to be. Like, that's the thing.
Absolutely. It can start with, kind of like my eyelashes.
Exactly. That's exactly. And then next thing you know, you build up that it's almost as
Right.
though you're building up the muscle. And then you go,
You
wait a
really
minute,
are.
I love my eyes.
Right? Right? It's absolutely, there's, yeah, it really is about that. So yeah,
All
I'm
right. I think it's so good. We've got just a few minutes left, Katie. There are a lot of things that we didn't get to in this show, but I think the show just went in the best direction, like it was meant to go in. Obviously, we both trust that process. I would like to know if there's anything that I didn't ask that you wanted to talk about. And also, please feel free to let people know how they can get a hold of you. I'll put links to all your stuff as well in the show notes so that there's an easy access for people. But yeah, I'd just love to know your final comments or anything.
oh, I think I enjoyed this immensely, and I do always let my guides kind of take over and tell people whatever they need to hear, or want to hear. So I think this has been great. Your questions have been great. It's been wonderful talking to you.
You too.
And so, no, I guess just encourage people to check out my website, which is katiebeecher.com, BEE. There's a lot of different articles and blog posts and interviews and all that kind of stuff, where you can learn more about me and the process, and even some of the techniques that I talked about, there's some articles about those on my website. And if you would like to make an appointment, basically just go through the website as well. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm always really great about getting back to people with DMs or emails or things like that. So I
Perfect.
welcome questions.
And what you said too is that, you know, you can do all this stuff remotely. I know that in the US right now, that you guys are still in lockdown, are you?
No, it
Really
kind of
not?
depends on the state, or it depends on the area, but most places are pretty open. I live in Florida, which is kind of the Wild West, so
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes, it is.
But no, I see people all over the world
Yeah.
on video chat. So
Yeah,
yeah,
perfect. That's so awesome. That's one of the powerful things about the internet and how I can be in Australia talking to you over in the
right.
US, which is just
You're in Australia.
so cool. I am, yes.
I am
Yeah.
so jealous. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world. So
Yeah.
okay,
That's why I look super tanned and I've got the air con on. I've got a tank top on today.
awesome. I love it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I would love to invite you back, no pressure, when you're ready to
It'll be
launch the
fun.
book, because I
Yeah,
think it would be such perfect timing. And, you know, it's just, I think that, you know, I'm like you, I'm in line with your vision in the sense of like empowering people to find their own power. That's always been something that I've been, you know, passionate about as well. So I'd love to speak with you further on that.
I would love that.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave us a review where you listen to your podcast and share it with your friends. Thank you. New episodes every Thursday.